Revenge is a damning emotion. Many have said that it is the very fiber of darkness and bitterness. But isn't the bond of a father far greater than the need for revenge? And what would make a man who seemingly had a happy life end it all? 2 murder, 1 arson, 2 teenagers burned alive. 1 survivor that lived to tell the story. Today, we delve into a tale that begins with a picture-perfect life but breaks into the stuff of nightmares. A murder so shocking, it tore apart a family and left investigators scrambling for answers. Who could commit such a heinous act? And why? But before we uncover the chilling events of that fateful night, let us step back and meet the people at the heart of this story. This is the story of the Tyson family. From the outside, they were the embodiment of happiness. But as we soon learn, appearances can be the greatest deception. And every tragic story usually begins with a fairy tale prologue. Caroline Tyson. A loving wife, a devoted mother, and a lively sister. Caroline was known for her generosity and kindness. She volunteered at the local shelter, hosted fundraisers for underprivileged children, and always made time for her 2 children, Tamara and Lucas. Born in a small town in upstate New York, Caroline was the eldest of 3 siblings. Her childhood was filled with dreams of making the world a better place. After earning a degree in auditing, she dedicated her life to helping those in need. To her friends, Caroline was a beacon of hope. To her children, she was their everything. But what kind of person would want to harm someone like Caroline? Who would want to end someone so charitable, so serene, so loving? And why? Andrew Tyson. Andrew Tyson married Caroline after 8 years of courting. As was a successful architect, Andrew built his career designing luxurious homes all over the city and beyond. But his greatest pride was his family. Charming, intelligent, hardworking, and successful, Andrew seemed to have it all. He met Caroline during their college years, and their love story was the kind people envied. When Caroline died tragically, Andrew was broken. He played the role of a grieving husband so convincingly that no one suspected him at first. But as we'll soon uncover, sometimes the truth hides in plain sight. Caroline and Andrew doted on their children, often hosting playdates and family game nights. To the outside world, the Tysons were the picture of happiness. But as we'll soon learn, even the happiest families can harbor dark secrets. Ask yourself this: how well do you really know the people around you? Do our words match our actions? And how well can hatred be hidden? Caroline and Andrew might have been perfect on the outside, but no relationship is without its challenges, and behind the smiles and loving gestures were moments of tension that only their children saw. The events that ruined their home had started over something trivial: an argument about Andrew working too late, missing yet another family dinner. It wasn't their first argument, but this one felt different. In the days that followed, Caroline began to withdraw. She loved her husband, but his absence in their relationship left her feeling isolated. It was during this time of vulnerability that someone new entered her life. His name was Ethan Turner, a charming, charismatic man she met through her volunteer work at the local shelter. Ethan, with his easy smile and attentive nature, offered Caroline the comfort she didn't realize she was longing for. At first, their interactions were innocent. They talked about their shared passion for helping others, exchanged book recommendations, and laughed over coffee after long days at the shelter. But as weeks turned into months, their connection deepened. Caroline found herself drawn to Ethan in ways she hadn't anticipated. He listened to her, made her feel seen and valued in a way she hadn't felt in years. One evening, after an especially difficult day and a fight with Andrew about forgetting their son's final swimming tournament, Caroline found herself in Ethan's bed. At first, she told herself it was a mistake, that it would never happen again. But as much as she wanted to deny it, the affair continued. Caroline was torn. She loved Andrew, but Ethan awakened something in her that she couldn't ignore. She rationalized her actions, convincing herself that as long as Andrew never found out, no one would get hurt. For a time, it seemed like she was right. The affair remained a secret, buried beneath the facade of a happy home. Andrew, completely unaware of Caroline's infidelity, continued to pour himself into his work and family. He had no reason to suspect anything. To him, Caroline was as devoted as ever. And in truth, she was. Despite her affair, Caroline's sister claimed that she never stopped loving Andrew or their children. But the twist is that Caroline had never carried Andrew's babies. And secrets have a way of coming to light, often in the most unexpected ways. For Andrew Tyson, the moment his seemingly perfect world began to crumble wasn't during a tense confrontation at home or a slip of the tongue at a family gathering. No, it happened in the most unlikely of places, an auto repair shop. That morning had been ordinary. Andrew had left the house in a rush, late for yet another meeting, when he noticed his car's trunk refusing to close properly. On top of that, a flat tire had forced him to pull over on the way to work. Frustrated but resigned, he decided to take the car to a local auto shop. He figured it was an opportunity to address both issues while grabbing a few moments to breathe. As he arrived, he handed over his keys, explaining the issues to the mechanic, then settled into the waiting area with a cup of black coffee. He wasn't in the mood for small talk, so he scrolled through his phone absent-mindedly, tuning out the world around him. But as he waited, a conversation nearby caught his attention. Two men, casually leaning against the counter, were chatting animatedly. At first, Andrew barely registered their words. It was just the usual banter about sports, cars, and relationships. But then the topic shifted to something more provocative. One of the younger men was bragging about dating older, richer married women who volunteered at the Social Services Institute. Andrew stiffened. It wasn't a subject he had any interest in, but the mention of the social services where his wife worked drew his attention. Andrew told himself to ignore it, but the conversation grew louder, harder to block out. He wasn't a man who eavesdropped, but now he found himself unable to tune them out entirely. She can't have enough of me. She's planning a divorce as we speak. But I'm not ready for that crap, the younger man said. Andrew shifted uncomfortably in his seat. He didn't know why, but a strange feeling began to creep over him. Maybe it was the way they spoke, the casual arrogance in their tone, or the hint of malice in their laughter. Whatever it was, he found himself listening more closely. And then, it happened. The first man, whom he found out was named Ethan, said a name that sent a chill down Andrew's spine, Caroline. Andrew froze. His heart skipped a beat, his mind racing. It couldn't be his Caroline, his wife, the mother of his children. It had to be a coincidence. After all, Caroline wasn't an uncommon name. But as the conversation continued, the details began to align in a way that left no room for doubt. Ethan continued, describing how Caroline was smart, beautiful, and she's had 2 kids for him, twins actually, but she won't let him take them because she trusts her workaholic husband who is barely around to take care of them. She claims I can't afford a family, he said. Andrew froze. His kids. Hey, man, they're your kids. Andrew asked. At first, Ethan was a little shocked that he'd been listening, but he didn't know him. For all he cared, he was just some bored guy at the repair shop, so he didn't hold back anything. Yeah, they're mine. When she found out she was pregnant, she wanted us to run off, but I told her she should wait. Well, I guess she decided to give my kids, Tamara and Lucas, to her husband, and now she's planning to run off with me. But man, I'm not ready for all that baggage. He's taking care of them, so he better keep up with that. I'm cool with just the mama. He laughed. He was a loud man. Andrew noted that he took pride in narrating his vile story. This was no coincidence. Caroline, working at a social services institute, with twins named Tamara and Lucas, and a workaholic husband. It was his wife. There was no denying that. Andrew's hands tightened around the armrest of his chair. The world seemed to blur around him as his worst fears came to life in vivid detail. He couldn't believe what he was hearing, yet every word Ethan spoke confirmed the impossible truth. This wasn't just a Caroline. This was his Caroline. Ethan's voice took on a mocking tone as he continued. She's a dreamer, though. Wanted me to take her to Manhattan, start fresh, bring our kids along. But I'm not that guy, you know. I just might skip town without saying a word. She'll probably hate me now, but it's for the best. No way I'm getting tied down to a situation like that. Andrew felt a mix of emotions. For a second, he wanted to confront Ethan, to demand answers, to defend Caroline's honor. But something held him back. Maybe it was the fear of making a scene, or the overwhelming shock of the moment. Instead, he stood up quietly, leaving the waiting area and heading straight for his car. He didn't care about the flat tire or the malfunctioning trunk anymore. He just needed to get out of there. As he sat in the driver's seat, staring blankly at the steering wheel, Andrew replayed the conversation over and over in his mind. Each word was like a dagger, cutting deeper into his heart. How had he been so blind? How had he not seen the signs? And why had Caroline done this to him, to their family? The drive home was a blur. Andrew's hands trembled on the steering wheel, his thoughts racing. For a long time, he sat there in silence, unable to bring himself to step inside. When he finally did, the house felt different, almost unfamiliar. He looked at the pictures on the walls, the memories they had built together, and wondered how much of it had been a lie. Caroline greeted him with her usual warmth. Andrew forced a smile, but he couldn't meet her eyes. That night, as he lay in bed beside her, after missing dinner, Andrew stared at the ceiling, unable to sleep. He had so many questions, but he didn't know where to begin. How could he confront Caroline about something that had happened so long ago? And more importantly, how could he ever look at her the same way again? It's said that betrayal can break a person. But in Andrew Tyson's case, it didn't just break him, it destroyed every ounce of humanity he had left. The man who had once prided himself on being a loving husband, a devoted father, and a hard-working provider became a monster. This is when the story took a most horrifying turn. Andrew spent weeks after his discovery grappling with the truth about Caroline. His emotions shifted between rage and heartbreak, and though he tried to suppress his growing hatred, it festered like an untreated wound. To Caroline, he appeared quieter than usual, more distracted, but she chalked it up to work stress. She didn't know that her husband's silence was the calm before the storm. Andrew had trailed after her one noon and met her with Ethan, the same man at the auto repair shop, right in the city's hotel. It was all true. Tamara and Lucas didn't belong to him. She'd cheated on him years ago and was still cheating on him now. It was in that moment, parked outside the hotel lot, that he made up his mind. It was a decision born out of pain and hatred. Out of a crushing thirst for revenge. A decision that would leave the world in shock. It happened on a cool autumn evening. The twins were at a friend's house for the weekend, a sleepover that Andrew had arranged and Caroline had happily agreed to. That evening, Andrew cooked dinner, made love to her like his life depended on it. And when they laid in that post-orgasmic bliss, he asked her the one question burning in his mind. "Who is Ethan?" Caroline shot out of the bed, and in that moment, Andrew knew she was guilty. But of course, he didn't need confirmation. He'd seen it all. What followed was a confrontation. Andrew demanded answers. He wanted to know how long she had lied to him, how she could betray their family so callously, and whether she had ever loved him at all. Caroline tried to deny it at first, but Andrew's accusations were too precise, too damning. Eventually, she broke down, confessing to the affair with Ethan. "It was a mistake," she replied, "but it's not like you were ever home to meet my needs." Andrew knew at this time that he could never forgive her. He recalled how he had spent years sacrificing for their family, working late nights and long hours, and now he realized it had all been for nothing. The love he once felt for her was gone, replaced by a seething hatred that demanded retribution. The kids weren't his. Nothing was his own. Earlier that day, Andrew was in the garage, where he kept a collection of tools neatly arranged on a pegboard. He had to choose between a wrench, then a hammer, before finally settling on a thick rope. Now, that rope lay under their mattress, and as he argued with her, he was reaching for it. For a moment, Andrew hesitated. He remembered their wedding day, the way she had smiled at him as they exchanged vows. But that memory was quickly replaced by bitterness and rage. Caroline threatened to leave with her kids, saying she was unhappy and Andrew had done nothing about it for years. That's when Andrew attacked. He looped the rope around her neck and pulled tight. Caroline was shocked at this violence. Andrew was never an aggressive man. They'd had their fights, but he'd never physically touched her. Afraid, she begged and her hands clawed at the noose as she struggled for breath. But Andrew didn't stop. Her muffled cries and desperate thrashing grew weaker until, finally, she went still. The room was silent once more. Andrew stood there for a moment, staring down at her lifeless body. There was no satisfaction, no relief, only a hollow emptiness. He knew what he had done could never be undone, but there was no turning back now. He dragged her body to the garage, wrapping it in an old tarp before loading it into the trunk of his car. The same trunk that had refused to close properly just weeks earlier. The trunk that led him to the auto repair shop that changed his entire life. Driving out at midnight, Andrew took Caroline's body to a town nearly 50 miles away. It was a place he had no connection to, a place where no one would think to look for her, dumping her in an abandoned wood mill. As he drove away, he told himself it was over, that he could move on and start anew. But deep down, he knew that wasn't true. In the days that followed, Andrew played the role of the grieving husband perfectly. He filed a missing persons report, tearfully pleading with police and neighbors for help in finding his wife. He organized search parties, gave emotional interviews to local news stations, and even consoled the twins, who were devastated by their mother's disappearance. Everyone believed him. After all, Andrew Tyson was a pillar of the community, a kind, hard-working man who loved his family. No one suspected the truth, and for a while, it seemed Andrew might get away with it. But secrets have a way of coming to light, and 2 months later, 14-year-old Tamara asked his father what he'd done with his mother. Andrew was shocked at the question. What could a teenager possibly know? What had she found out? Tamara Tyson had never been the quiet one. She was free-spirited and very curious. That night, before she'd left for the sleepover, Tamara thought it was weird that her father would even suggest it when he never let her out late. And then, she wondered why her mother would leave home without her phone or car. It didn't add up. And she'd seen the angry look on Andrew's face for weeks before Caroline's sudden disappearance. But it wasn't just that. Tamara knew about her mother's affair. She'd stumbled in on a phone conversation that she promised to keep secret. So when her mother mysteriously disappeared, Tamara knew her scorned father had something to do with it. Andrew denied it. He told her Caroline had driven out that evening and never returned. But she argued and threatened to go to the police. And that was when Andrew snapped. He called her a bastard and said she was lucky he still had her in his home. It was in this moment that Tamara knew that Andrew wasn't their father. But still, he denied anything to do with her death. Andrew knew it was just a matter of time before someone found out. Before Tamara told her friends at school or her teacher. Andrew wasn't ready to go down for what he'd done. And so that night, when the kids had gone to sleep, he grabbed a canister of gasoline from the garage and set the house ablaze, with the twins still inside. Lucas died before the rescue team could arrive after sustaining 90% burns. But Tamara was a survivor and she made it to the hospital. 4 months later, still traumatized with the incident and loss of her mother and brother, she was able to tell this shocking story. The police began to investigate, arresting Ethan for questioning and following up the story of Tamara. Finally, on the 7th month, Caroline's body was found. But Andrew Tyson had disappeared that night, vanishing without a trace. To this day, no one knows where he is or if he's still alive. His story remains a haunting reminder of how far a person can fall when consumed by anger and betrayal. And for those who knew the Tyson family, the question lingers, could anyone have seen this coming? Was this just a case of a wife's infidelity or a story of a monster who had been waiting for the right trigger to unleash his horror? This is the story of betrayal, an all-consuming need for revenge, and an underage survivor who lives to tell the tale.